Hello there. This is Botany 101 and I am Angela Nishimoto. So here we are together again. Okay, so today, evolution. And our objectives for today include the concept of fixed species. Okay, that's one. Also, this famous man, Charles Darwin, and his adventures regarding the HMS Beagle and his voyage on it. Thirdly, we're going to get into the idea that species, remember we talked about species last time? Well, we're going to get into the idea that these species actually evolve, okay? Then we're going to talk about natural selection, right? And then we're going to have mechanisms, evidence, and also examples of evolution, okay? So first, the concept of fixed species, way back in the Greek days, okay? Here's a little picture of a fellow named Anaximander. Okay, he lived and worked about 2,500 years ago, and you can tell this is actually looks like a piece of a larger, art piece. And I think this is the one where you see Plato and I believe Socrates, walking through, and you have the arches and everything. And this is a good example in art history of the three-dimensional, the perspective, okay, Western perspective. Anyway, so this I think is a portrait of Anaximander from that piece. Now he believed, he put forth the idea that life actually arose in water. Okay, this is a concept that many scientists do kind of subscribe to. Not just that, also the Hawaiian epic, the Kumulipo, actually does say this, something similar, that living things did arise in water, that life actually started in water. So that this is where the Kumulipo and also modern scientific thinking sort of come together, Furthermore, Anaximander believed that simpler forms eventually became more complex forms. Okay, and this also is echoed or is sort of like in contrapuntal sort of thing, where in the Kumulipo, this is what the chanter will be telling us too, if you were to listen to it, okay? Later on though, okay, this fellow named Aristotle, very influential fellow. I believe he was a disciple of, of Socrates, I believe. Okay, so Aristotelian thought has kind of taken over Western, ideas for many centuries, but he believed that species are fixed. That means, what he means by that is that species are as they are and that they do not change. They are fixed. Okay, just like if you, take a piece of a plant and you cut it up, you make a slide and you fix it and you seal it, generally the cells on there will not change. They'll remain stained and they'll remain in the same condition that they were when you first made the slide, okay, as long as your technique is good, right? We also had the idea, okay, from Judeo-Christianity, okay, which is one of the main kind of overarching sort of philosophies all over, Europe and also into North America. Okay, so even if we might not be conscious of it, Judeo-Christian thought and philosophy permeates all aspects of our culture, and they pop up in all kinds of different ways. Anyway, so the Judeo-Christian view too takes the book of Genesis literally. Okay, so here's a little piece, I believe, of the Sistine Chapel, very famous. You have God, God here actually animating Adam. Okay, so God is supposed to be animating Adam, and Adam was actually constructed from red clay. Even the name Adam means red clay man or something like that. Okay, so the book of Genesis, okay, people take that even now sometimes, and in the past certainly in Europe, okay, as fact. And using the book of Genesis and the part I believe that's called Kings, that talks about the genealogy all the way from Adam, all the way to King David, and then from the house of David to Jesus Christ. Okay, so using the book of the Genesis, people, theologists and people who thought about these things figured out, or they believe, they use, so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. So you had all these generations of people from the time of the creation when Adam was supposed to have been created. And according to them, depending on the interpretation, that the earth itself was only about 4,000 to 6,000 years old. Okay, so this is something that everybody, had in common in Europe and I guess in North America, the Europeanized parts of North America. People did believe that the world was literally 4,000 to 6,000 years old. Okay, and also that species did not change. Okay, so they believe that living things do not change, as species are fixed. So that's a little bit of the heritage from Aristotle, for one thing, and certainly too, because when you talk about Genesis, they talk about God creating different kinds of animals on certain days and different parts of the universe, different parts of the earth during different days. Okay. Now, people kind of thought about this, people thought about this, and there's a Frenchman named Georges Buffon. Okay, he studied, and of course, you can see here that from this image that he was definitely an upper class fellow with his brocaded or sort of waistcoat, I believe it's called, and his velvet coat and all this fancy work here. Okay, so his name was Georges Buffon, very brilliant fellow. Okay, so what he did is he studied fossils, and here's like a nice, cute little fossil of a little trilobite. Right? So Buffon would have noticed that there were things that lived before, like this little critter. You just have to look at it to know that it was a living thing, or it's actually a fossil of something that once lived. He only had to look around and observe the world around him to see that these trilobites don't exist anymore. Okay, so even with his background being a European, right, a Frenchman, he started to think maybe the world, as we know it even now, that the world must be much older than 4,000 to 6,000 years, okay? Another point, too, is that he kind of made that linkage that the fossil form of an animal or a plant could be an ancient version, something that lived before, okay, of something similar that exists now. So doesn't it make sense to us now when we think about it? Okay, did you make the leap? That something that once existed that does not exist anymore, couldn't it be too? That there are different kind of organisms, whether plant or animal, that live now and maybe in the future might not exist at all. Okay, that's sort of like a little bit of a projecting into the future, but this is something that scientists do. Yes? Now, in the 1800s, okay, another fellow, another Frenchman named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, okay, he practiced another very intelligent man, very, very intelligent, okay? So he put forth the idea, thoughtfully, that life does evolve. And even though people tend to, maybe make a little bit joke about his name because they talk about something called Lamarckianism, okay, which most people would say is not held to be true. Okay, so he actually was the first modern person in the 1800s to put forth the very brave notion that life changes, living things change, okay? So he figured out, or he put forth the idea, that evolution is actually a series of adaptations to conditions in the environment. Okay, famously, he talked about giraffes. So what is the noteworthy aspect of a giraffe? For one thing, it has this very, very long neck. And it's a big animal, too. If you ever saw the giraffes over at the Honolulu Zoo, they're big animals, So these animals, I guess they're animals of the savanna, the African savanna, and they can actually, because they're tall like this with this really long neck, they can actually reach up, high up in the trees to eat leaves, because these animals are vegetarians, they're herbivores, they eat plants, okay? Now, Lamarck made one thing that people tend to unfortunately equate his name with, in that he believed in the acquisition of the inheritance of acquired characteristics, and we believe now that this isn't something that does happen. Say if we were to use a giraffe as an example, he could say that as one, the mother or father giraffe stretches his or her neck up higher and higher, that, that the neck will eventually elongate, okay, after a time. You've actually seen this with different, tribes people in different areas of the world, like the women who wear a lot of bangles around their neck, so their necks get to be very, very long. Yeah, so that might be something that he might have been aware of. So he believed that a giraffe whose neck got longer in its lifetime would be able to pass on this acquired characteristic and thereby a longer neck down to its offspring. Okay, so nowadays we don't hold this to be true. Because for one thing, one example that people use is that, hey, if you're a gym rat, you like to go to the gym, and you have these six-pack abs, you have really good lats and the whole schmoog, you know, good biceps and triceps and everything like that, that if you really train hard and then you have a baby, whether you're a man or a woman, you know, that your baby when it's born isn't all muscular, you know, with really big, you know, different kinds of muscles, anything. So that, if in fact that did happen, that would be called the inheritance of acquired characteristics, because when you were born, you probably weren't all really muscled, you know, as somebody who goes to the gym maybe 5 times a week would be, yeah? Anyway, so unfairly, okay, people remember Lamarck for this Lamarckian kind of idea of evolution. Okay, but his great achievement was he really saw that life does change. Okay, this is something that we believe now. Okay, maybe someday we might be proved false, or maybe the theory of evolution will become adapted to new findings. But you know, right now there are people who think that evolution is fact. Okay. Now, what happened? You had something called the Voyage of the Beagle, and here is actually a painting of the beagle itself. I believe this is actually depicting an area someplace in the Pacific, you know, maybe near the Galapagos Islands or some of the other island areas in the Pacific region. Okay, so the Voyage of the Beagle we're going to talk about next, which was instrumental in forming modern evolutionary thinking. So the fellow, of course, that we all associate with the theory of evolution is Charles Darwin. Okay, he was born in 1809, the same year that Abraham Lincoln was born. Okay, his background, you can see here, he's kind of dressed kind of quietly, but he's still, you can tell he's a gentleman, you know, and in those days, a gentleman was somebody of a particular class. Okay, his mother's maiden name was Wedgwood, and his mother was actually from the Wedgwood China family. So they were quite prosperous. Not just that, as Charles Darwin also had a very well-known, very famous grandfather named Erasmus Darwin. Okay, very famous, brilliant man. He comes from a family of physicians. Okay, his grandfather, very famous, prominent physician. His father himself was also a country doctor, and Charles Darwin seemed to be on that track too. Okay, so when he was 16 years old, he was sent to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh. Okay, and this is the University of Edinburgh, one of its buildings. Old building, kind of nice looking, huh? I don't know what kind of architecture you would call that. Georgian? I'm not sure. I don't really know architecture that well. Anyway, so the thing was about Charles Darwin was he was repulsed and disgusted at the brutality of surgery at the time, because what happened? If you had to have an amputation, what would they do? They would just chop your arm off or whatever, you know, with whatever tool they had. So you can imagine at that time, surgery was very crude, okay, very crude, and also horribly, it's almost like butchering, you know, at the time. So he was repulsed, offended, didn't want to do it. Okay, so what he did is he transferred to Cambridge University, and he studied theology instead. What is theology? Theology is when you study religion. Okay, or theo refers to God, just like deo refers to God, and logi is the study of. So theology is sort of like the study of religion or study of God, okay, or whatever religion that you happen to be in. In this case, it would have been Christianity. And I think he was quite devout too. He was studying to become a minister. Okay, and here's a picture. I think that is actually, I think that's King's College. Okay, I'm not totally sure, but I think that is King's College at Cambridge University. This is one of the best universities in the world, even now. Okay, very exclusive, beautiful. Yeah, doesn't that make you want to kind of go over there and hang out? All right, so he studied theology at Cambridge University. But while he was at Cambridge University, he was still into natural history. You have to remember that Charles Darwin, similar to that other fellow, let's see, Linnaeus, he just had this propensity. He loved to go out and collect birds, you know, shoot birds, collect them, study them, fossils, plants. He just loved it. And in the time that he lived, this was a field of study called natural history. So he spent a lot of time shooting birds, collecting plants, growing things, because he was so interested in different aspects of science, okay? So natural history had to do with studying different kinds of living things, including plants, including animals, especially things that they had called curiosities. You know, in England, I guess maybe during this time too, they had something called a curios, C-U-R-I-O-S. And these are usually pieces of fossil or shells or something that are naturally sort of part of natural history that people found very interesting. So they had curio cabinets where you had little knickknacks, usually from nature, that people would have. So I find that their culture of this time in England was kind of interesting too, you know, to kind of try to think about how they think. Because one of the things you have to remember that all these different people were telling you about, they lived in a different world than we do now. They thought differently. Their assumptions were totally different from what we have nowadays in the United States. That everything, you know, their whole paradigm, their whole view on life is completely different from what we think of it now. Okay? Anyway, so he studied this natural history because this was his enthusiasm. He loved natural history. Okay, this is what he loved. He loved that, even though he was studying theology, because I guess he wanted to be practical and have something to do for a living. So what happened is one of his professors, okay, one of his friends, professors, liked him very much, and he recommended Darwin, okay, to be ship naturalist, because usually when you had ships going out from England or from Portugal or all these kind of places, usually they would send a naturalist and maybe sometimes even an artist with the ship to kind of document what kind of living things. Because one of the things that was very important, because remember when we talked about so-called the voyages of discovery, that one of the things that motivated them was actually spices and herbs, and exotic spices and herbs especially, you know, because there's a lot of money to be made at that. And also people in Europe, you know, since they were very prosperous, you know, they probably got a lot of their money from going to other countries and taking a lot of the things in other countries in colonialism, you know. But and people in Europe were just crazy about natural stuff, strange kind of animals, strange by which I mean unusual to them. You know, like I guess people would find it trendy and kind of fashionable to have a pet monkey or something like that, okay? So they were very interested in the natural world, and a lot of people were being educated too. This is like in the 1800s, this was after the French Revolution, right, which happened in 1776. So this is something where people were starting to be interested in the common man, okay? Anyway, so the voyage of the Beagle, all right? He was on the ship for 5 years. Pretty much they sailed out of England, kind of crossed the Atlantic, went, because the purported motivation for this voyage was to map the coastline of South America. So English ships could actually go around here and then head to the Orient, the east part, where you had a lot of the spices and other goods that people wanted to get. Anyway, the Beagle went down the coast and they stopped in many places, and of course Charles Darwin, he got seasick a lot, so whenever they put into somewhere, he'd spend a lot of time on land, tramping around and hiking and all that sort of thing. Another interesting thing, part of the puzzle, is that he took with him a book by Charles Lyell. Now Lyell was a geologist who studied land formations and such like that, and so he saw the Andes, you know, South America. He saw, you know, different kinds of animals and plants on the South American mainland, all the way from the Tierra del Fuego, way in the south, all the way up, you know, up in the more closer to the tropical areas, okay, of South America. Then he also went, of course, very famously to the Galapagos Islands. And a lot of what he saw in the Galapagos, as well as what he saw in South America, really made him think. Lyell was a scientist, a geologist, or somebody who wrote in geology that talked about very slow changes. That Lyell was putting forth the idea that maybe the Earth is much, much older than it actually is, because people would notice volcanism, you know, where volcanoes would erupt and you'd have an island either being blown up and destroyed, like in Krakatoa, right, in Java, right? Or to the east of Java, and then you also have things like mountain building, like the Himalayas being built very, very slowly over many years, okay? So he also noticed that many of the plants and animals on the Galapagos Island, which was a tropical area, you see it's right on the equator, this is the equator, this line here. So the Galapagos Islands, right on the equator, tropical, had a lot of different kinds of animals and plants that had much more in common with plants and animals, even in this kind of latitude of South America, than it did with other islands, okay, in the tropics. So this is kind of an interesting thing to him. Why would that be? You would have thought that if a particular animal was created in one area that made it adaptable and being able to live in here, don't you think that God would have made an animal similar to it here too, or even the same type? But maybe for him, he had to really think. Because one of the things that we humans, as we evolve and become better thinkers, they have that cliche about thinking outside of the box, as if it's a television or something. And that's good to think out of that box anyway. But at the same time, it's really, really hard to kind of get your mind to go beyond the certain kind of assumptions, the gestalt of the particular era in which you live. But he was a brilliant, brilliant man, okay? Anyway, so from the Galapagos, they sailed to Tahiti. They went, what some people call Otaite, yeah? And they sailed across the Pacific Ocean, went to Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand, went to what we call Australia today, Tasmania, okay? You know that the Tasmanian people, they're extinct, okay? All the Tasmanian, they're gone, okay? They went to another place in Australia. They went to an island in the Indian Sea, in the Indian Ocean. They went to Madagascar. Over here, there's a large island off the, southeast coast of Africa. They went around the Cape of Good Hope, crossed the Atlantic, the South Atlantic again, and eventually made their way back up into England. So it was a very eventful sort of thing because it got this man thinking, okay? So he was on this ship for 5 years, okay? Of course, true to his nature, true to his interests, he collected plants and he collected animals, okay? Because he was interested in them. This was his passion, natural history and living things. And so they went to South America, of course, Galapagos Islands, very important, where you have the tortoises, you have the iguanas, you have what they call nowadays Darwin's finches, Australia as well, New Zealand, okay? And he also collected fossils, yes? He just kind of practiced being a naturalist. So it sounds almost like a wonderful thing. It's almost like what some people used to do in the earlier part of the 20th century, where wealthy people Americans would send their daughters or their sons to do the continent, in their last year of school. Yeah, that's something that they did. So he was like going on a field trip that lasted 5 years. So despite the fact that he was seasick and not feeling really good all the time, he still must have had a field day, literally, okay? Another thing he did is he kind of studied the Andes, the different ways, different sort of geological formations were actually structured, okay? So this is a map, okay, showing some geologic features, okay, depending on the topography of these various places, okay? So you have the ocean, okay, the oceanic areas. Anyway, this is just showing that geology, okay, is a science that changes even now, all right? And we also have here, this is not Charles Darwin. I just wanted to put this picture in because it shows sort of like the passion of these fellows, people who are really interested in a particular. So this guy is examining some kind of a rock or mineral that he's discovered. It looks like he's spelunking, going into a cave or something. So, when people are pursuing and they're living and doing what they should be doing, time really stops. It's sort of like almost as if you don't age when you're doing what you should be doing, That's just my thought. That doesn't have any kind of scientific credence. Anyway, so when he returned back to England, he settled down, he got married. He married his first cousin. I think she was a daughter of one of his mother's sisters, and her name was Emma Wedgwood. Okay, so she too, his family, her family, very well off. And I know that I seem to be stressing that too much, but when you think about it, that makes sense. Because most people, in the past, and even now, most people are too busy working, okay, or taking care of their kids, or doing both, and holding down 2 or 3 jobs, or just trying to survive. Most people don't have time or the leisure to sit down and think about things, okay? So what he did have time to do, he actually settled down as sort of like a pastor in a way. He wrote papers, he had time to do experiments, and he did his correspondences. He actually corresponded to a lot of different people, a lot of scientists who were very active, because that was his enthusiasm. He loved natural history, he loved science, and also he had a mind for it, a great, brilliant mind who could kind of see and had vision and could see beyond the world immediately around him. So I can't stress that enough. Okay? that one of the things that we might notice if you kind of look at the sociological casts of the different kind of scientists that did in very important work, all of these people, men, almost all of them, all of these people tended to be well-born. They all also tended to come from very wealthy families, because even in the 1800s, you did not have universal education. Okay, people got to learn how to read and write. They learned Latin and Greek and a lot of the classics, and they did that if they had enough money, that they could spare the time to do that. Okay, many people, most of the people in the world at the time had to go to work when they were 10, 11, 12 years old. Okay, a lot of them maybe knew how to sign their name, but that maybe was it, or make a mark, you know, on the paper. Okay, that's it. So, this is just happenstance that the people, and it makes sense that the people who made the great scientific discoveries, you know, Newton and etc., into the 1800s, all these different people, is that they tended to be upper class people because they had the time, they had the ability to be educated, and not only were they intelligent, doesn't mean that other people who didn't make discoveries weren't also intelligent. Maybe they say that chance favors the prepared mind. So if you have the education, if you have the background world, there's more of a chance that you will make certain kinds of scientific inquiries, scientific conclusions, and do all this brilliant work that you might have the potential to do, but you just need to have the background to do it. Otherwise, it's just not something that can happen. It's not anything to really be angry about, or it's just an interesting observation. Okay? Anyway, so another thing that happened is that, you know, as, you know, Darwin was kind of thinking over what he saw in the Galapagos and in South America, okay? So he was kind of thinking about this. He was actually working on a pretty long work that we're going to talk about in a moment. Now this fellow here, this picture, and this name is spelled correctly, there was only one L in his name. His name was Lord Alfred Russel Wallace, okay? He was doing work, okay, also as a naturalist in these different areas, and he independently thought up exactly the same idea as Darwin had, something called natural selection, okay? So he worked in Malaysia. Okay, this is this light-colored part of the this geographical map shows Malaysia, yeah, Kuala Lumpur and etc. And then he also did his field work in Indonesia as well. You can see that Indonesia, you know, one of the most populated areas in the world, one of the very populous areas of the world. Okay, very important, and these areas were also known as the Spice Islands. So Alfred Wallace did his research in this area too, and he independently came up with the same ideas as Darwin, okay? He independently, so these two fine minds, independently, without knowing what the other was doing, thought up the same thing. Did you know that there is also like a thought that during the time that Sir Isaac Newton, you know, very brilliant, not a real easy fellow to get along with for sure, but oftentimes brilliant people are not often easy to live with, but that's just a stereotype. But during the time that Newton was working and inventing calculus, so people who are business majors and science majors have to take calculus, right? So, so when Newton was inventing it, apparently, I've heard that maybe one or two other people invented the calculus at about the same time, independently of each other. Isn't that interesting? All right. So what happened next was that when Darwin found out, you know, Wallace wrote Darwin, and Darwin wrote in his journal, "All my originality shall be smashed." So what happened is their friends kind of got them together and presented their paper, a joint presentation, to the Linnaean Society. So who do you think the Linnaean Society was named after? Carl Linné, Carl von Linné, yeah, or Carolus Linnaeus. So this is one of the real high muck-a-muck sort of scientific societies in the world, okay? All right, so this is where the Linnaean Society is housed in Burlington House. I believe that's in London, okay? Doesn't that look like a beautiful building? Yeah. And then the year after that, in 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. This is a watermark. This is like a very, very important publication. Did you know Darwin was supposed to have been one of the most influential people in the last millennium? I think when the year 2000 came along, they named, you know, all these people who are really influential, okay, on our modern world, and he was, of course, one of them, right? And then what happened was this Origin of Species. Okay, this is like a frontispiece of the work. Okay, when he published it. Remember, he was also a trained minister. And the reason why he had held off on this, he actually wrote it and then he set it aside. He worked on it for over 10 years after he came back, after he had a lot of time to think about it, because this is what happened, okay? You had a lot of people getting all, hot under the collar and jumping up and down, and a lot of people getting very steamed up about this idea. So even nowadays, people even when they take biology classes, they'll say, "Are we really descended from monkeys?" Of course, that's not true at all. But here, this is the head actually looks like Darwin when he was in his old age. He lived to be a pretty old fellow, and they have it on a body of, it looks like a chimpanzee. Okay, because we are not descended from monkeys. We are not descended from chimpanzees. Just according to the evolution, okay, if you go back far enough, we are actually a splinter off the same line that eventually gave rise to monkeys, one hand, and chimpanzees in another. So chimpanzees are supposed to be our closest relatives, but as you can see, he was vilified in the press. This is like one of many caricatures, because people said, "How dare you? How could you say this? This is sacrilege," and like that. But remember that he was a clergyman himself, okay? Yes, but so he, like many people who do have groundbreaking sort of ideas, he probably had to suffer from it. And did you see when you were looking at portraits of him? Didn't he seem like he looked like an introvert? Didn't he? Somebody who really likes his peace and quiet. So so his publication of his book just kind of erupted into this like whirlwind of controversy, which was quite something probably to be a party to or be aware of. So he did suffer. But still, one of the great minds of the last millennium, Now the idea that he put forth is something called natural selection. Now this idea of natural selection has 4 premises, okay, 4 parts. For one thing, the first part we can call variation. Okay? Members of a particular species differ from one another. So individuals of a particular species differ from one another. And secondly, these differences are inheritable, that these differences can be passed down from one generation to the next. We already talked about sexual reproduction in plants. We talked about meiosis, right, as well as mitosis. And meiosis, we already saw, you have recombination, and then you have fertilization, which is another kind of recombination, okay, of genes. All right? So even if you look at these seedlings, okay, these are actually germinating from this outside part is a fruit, okay? The seed inside would have germinated and make this cotyledon. And these are probably seedlings from the same flowering head, okay? And then what these are different kinds of individuals. They're probably sibling plants. But even if we can't see it, all 4 of these are different from one another. They are different. Okay, they have to be different because they are the result of sexual reproduction. And due to crossing over that happens during the prophase of meiosis, crossing over when you have those chiasmata being formed, right? You have recombination of genetic material, plus you have fertilization, and fertilization is random, okay, generally. So anyway, so that's the first thing, that individuals vary, they differ from one another, and the differences are inheritable. The second, so that was actually a picture of people. I believe this is in Taiwan. You have a whole bunch of people all crowded together. I think this is a subway in Taiwan. It has a lot of people. And of course, you just have to be sitting in class or be on a playground or be at a sporting event and look around you to see that all people look different from each other. Okay, at least to us. I was kind of talking about this to somebody. I kind of wondered aloud. Do you think maybe some animals, don't really see us very well? Because I know the dogs and cats, they don't have, good color vision like we do. But my cat, when I come home, he actually, when I open the door, he kind of stares toward the door, and then when I talk to him, then he starts meowing. So I just wonder maybe for us, we might look at different kind of cats and think, oh, they all look the same, and just their coloring is different. But it could be that cats and dogs look at us and think too, if they didn't have such a sharp sense of smell or a sharp sense of hearing so that they could smell us or hear us, then wouldn't they think that all humans don't look alike either, right? Okay. Anyway, so next part, okay, is that overproduction. So the first part has to do with variation. Okay. Second part has to do with overproduction of offspring. That usually more offspring are produced in nature than can possibly survive. Okay, that's a sad thing. So here we have a little picture of a wolf cub, with its either one of its fully grown parents here, you can see this is probably another young wolf. Whenever you look at one of those or watch one of those nature shows, what happens? You have a lioness with her cubs, or you have a wolf with her cubs, or you have a fox with her cubs, or different sorts of carnivores with their cubs. The standard of this is that when you see the cubs, that they're just born, you see that they're so cute, and they're, because we anthropomorphize animals. We sort of make them as if we're human. We kind of give a little bit of the feeling that we have for human infants onto infants or babies of animals too. But you know that it is a convention for nature shows for during the first year, usually one or two of the cubs will probably die of some reason or another, whether it starves to death because there's not enough food, or gets injured, or another animal kills it. That's part of the convention of nature shows. So that actually shows the second premise, that you have more being born that can possibly survive. Okay? Then next, we have the fact that because more are being born that can survive, okay, because you have individuals that are different from each other, therefore you have competition. That individuals of a species even will compete for scarce resources. Okay? That's something that Darwin called a struggle for existence. Because for most animals, for most human beings during the history of humans on Earth, people struggle, to live. Okay? That's something that we kind of take for granted because we live in a modern world with antibiotics, food enough to feed everybody, even if sometimes the food doesn't get to where it's needed. Okay, but really in nature, individuals compete for scarce resources, so they do struggle in order to just survive. The last precept has to do with survival to reproduce, that the individuals that survive, that are better suited to a particular environment, they will reproduce and perhaps pass off their genes to the next generation. Okay, pass their genes down to the next generations, the genes that kind of help them to survive. So here we have a mother. It looks like she's just given birth, given birth to her child. It looks like her husband here. And it looks like this is like a birthing tub. I know that there was a movement about that. Anyway, so this natural selection, okay, you have overproduction, you have scarce resources, and a struggle for existence. And those that actually pass on their genes actually have, Darwinian fitness, what they call Darwinian fitness, okay? Anyway, so what you have is survival of the fittest. The different kind of organisms that are best adapted to any particular environment are the most likely to survive. And not just that, is that they will be able to pass down their genes to their offspring. One of the things to remember also is that Darwin and Mendel, even though their lives overlapped each other, neither of them were aware of the other one's work. Okay, the work of evolution, Darwin's things, the work of genetics, which was Mendel's things, they didn't actually come together until maybe the early 1900s with something that they called the grand synthesis, or the great synthesis, bringing together the work of these, because, Mendel knew the mechanism for how different genes and different traits were passed down from parent to offspring. Darwin knew about evolution, but they never met each other. They never knew about each other's work. Okay? Anyway, so what happens is that you have the fact that the survival for reproduction, individuals will pass on good characteristics to the offspring, probably characteristics that made it advantageous for them to live in a particular environment. Okay? So Mendel would have been able to explain that. Okay? Darwin would have been able to explain the mechanism from, competition and etc. Okay? So here you have a mother duck with her little chickies, ducklings. I guess they're called ducklings, yeah? Anyway, so generally two, okay? More actually are born than usually survive. And that's a hard fact of nature. Sometimes people kind of get romantic about nature, and it's a really easy thing to get romantic about because many things in nature are very beautiful, But at the same time, nature itself is completely merciless. Usually, people know this like when they think about it intellectually, but it is usually the young and the old and the weak that are culled, that they usually die, okay, fairly easily, okay? But we humans, we tend to sentimentalize things, but nature itself is merciless. It doesn't show any mercy to anything because it's cute or because it's small or because it's weak and needs help. Okay, that's something that we humans hopefully bring to the table. okay, because we have the ability to feel compassion. Now here's a problem from your textbook, okay? So if you happen to have a plant population that reproduces only through asexual means, only asexually, that means it doesn't reproduce through seeds, okay? It actually reproduces only by cloning itself, okay? So a plant that, a particular species, a particular population of a plant that only can do asexual reproduction, can natural selection or the natural selection actually act on these plants? Think about that, okay? And I'm not going to answer the question. You have to think about that. It'll probably show up as a question on an exam or on a quiz. Now, the second part of the question, is this population able to evolve? Okay, does this population have the ability to evolve or have change over time? So that's what evolution is, change over time, right? Fashion evolves, okay? Economic markets evolve, all right? Paradigms do evolve, sometimes violently. Okay? So this is something I want you to think about, okay? So this is showing a piece of a plant. I think this is what we're going to find out later. I think this is a liverwort. Okay, a liverwort, and here are its little baby plants. These are actually new plants growing off this fragment. Okay? Asexual reproduction. Done without sex, remember? So asexually reproduced, an asexually produced plant has only one parent, okay? Sexually reproduced, through sexual reproduction, the seeds and the offspring plants come from two parents, okay? So you have a genetic recombination. Next, we're going to talk about mechanisms of evolution, okay? Let's see. For one thing, we have a concept known as genetic drift, okay? Genetic drift, okay? What is genetic drift? Do you remember from your reading? Okay, this is just something that you can call randomness. It has to do with random events, such as you could have a population of plants inhabiting a very small area, maybe the size of, let's see, the cafeteria at LCC, okay, the cafeteria at LCC, you have a plant population that lives only there. Okay, what happens? What if something happens? You have volcano erupting, and then you have the lava flowing over it, leaving only a very, very small remnant. Okay, that would be an example of genetic drift, where you have a bunch of the population wiped out, and you only have a piece of the population that doesn't have all the alleles. Remember what alleles are, right? These are variants on a particular gene, okay? So some of the alleles might be gone, all right? Now, one kind of genetic drift event is called the bottleneck effect, all right? And the bottleneck effect is just like that. Say, for example, you have a bottle, like a soda bottle, whether it's a glass bottle or a plastic bottle, with a narrow neck, and you have it full of marbles of different colors. Say you have yellow marbles, blue marbles, white marbles. Okay, you shake it up, and you actually only let out whatever happens to be near the out there. This whole bottle full of marbles, you only let 5 out. Okay, that would be an example of the bottleneck effect. You have an attenuation, a narrowing of a corridor through which you can actually move these different individuals. So therefore, when you have genetic drift, this is random. So it just happens to be, just so happens you might have 1 yellow, 3 white ones, and no blue ones. Maybe 2 yellow and 3 white ones coming out. Okay, no blue. That actually has to do with genetic drift. Okay, a narrowing or a bottlenecking event. Okay, a good example of an animal that has gone through a bottlenecking event is a cheetah. This is an African wildcat. It's a beautiful animal. It's supposed to be the fastest animal in the world. I think it can run for like 90 miles an hour when it's running fast enough to chase down prey. And the thing is that the cheetah actually went through a big bottleneck like about 10,000 years ago during the last ice age. And so all the cheetahs that exist in the world today, they're like 99.9999% identical to each other in terms of the genes that they have. Okay, they've inbred, so there was only a very, very small population, maybe only even like a pregnant female. Maybe that was the only thing that they had. But then over the centuries since then, they actually have managed to make a larger population, which of course has been beaten back by humans because of habitat destruction, also hunting, because people consider that the cheetah has encroached and feeds upon different kinds of animals that people like to eat too. Okay, so the cheetah, an excellent example of a kind of animal that has gone through a bottleneck. All right, it's kind of sad though, because they're lovely, beautiful animals, you know. Now next, we also have something called the founder effect. Okay, it's sort of like another variation of the bottleneck effect. So one of the things you can see is that genetic drift is random. You know, you don't have somebody going out and choosing, okay, you, and you survive, the other ones all die. It's like just due to random changes, okay? So the founder effect. Okay, so here we have a good illustration of the founder effect. This is a parent population. Yeah, parent population. Okay, founder effect has to do with who founds a new population. Okay, so if you have this kind of population, you see these red squares and you see these blue dots, okay, representing different kinds of alleles in a particular population of a particular species. Okay, what happens then if you have the individuals colonizing 3 different areas? Well, due to randomness, due to the random event sort of thing, you might only have 5 individuals that are red triangles. In one place, you'll have only 5 individuals that are blue circles, not triangles, squares, and you have some 5 different kinds of blue circular ones. Then what happens is that you'll have another area here with maybe 3 blue and 2 red. Okay, so this is a random thing. It's not something that can be selected for necessarily. Yeah, so founder effect, another example of genetic drift, where you have only founder effect when you have only 1 or very few individuals that colonize someplace. You know the Hawaiian honey creepers? Okay, the Hawaiian honey creepers, which are native endemic birds of Hawaii, they were probably the result of just one single gravid or pregnant female getting blown to the islands. And all the different honey creepers, all those beautiful red and yellow and green birds of the native Hawaiian forests, all of them, they think, or at one point they did think, that these were all descended from one pregnant female. Okay, I think they're doing molecular studies on them now to, see their sequences of nucleotides, or they're doing proteomics on them, which is probably the coming thing in molecular biology. Proteomics, kind of comparing proteins and also the amino acids making up the proteins. Okay, so they're, instead of comparing genes with each other, they're actually comparing proteins, or the end products. They call them proteomics. Okay. Now, gene flow is another sort of aspect and another kind of mechanism for evolution, because gene flow actually allows population to actually go from one place to another. Okay, so what happens if you have something like the beach alpaca, which we've seen before? Okay, have the beach alpaca that is the same species here as well as in Samoa and other South Pacific islands. It's because fruits of the alpaca are always floating out, to go wherever they're going to go, and also fruits are always floating in. So what you have is the ocean is acting as a corridor for genes to go from one population on Hawaii to another population, say on Samoa, okay, and vice versa. This is why the beach alpaca, or the alpaca kahakai, also known as Scaevola sericea, that's why this is the same species all over the Pacific, all the way from Guam, all the way to the islands of Hawaii as well, okay, because you have gene flow occurring between different populations. Now we also have mutations. Do you remember what mutations are? Mutations, remember? Okay, think about it for a minute. Okay, so mutations are any kind of random change in DNA. Okay, so mutation is also a way that you can get different species, okay, eventually, over time, okay, over long periods of time, because evolution usually takes centuries, or more likely thousands of years, okay, or even tens of thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands of years, or millions of years. Okay, so mutation is another way that you get new species. Okay, so now we're going to get into another topic here, which has to do for evidence for evolution. Okay, so one thing we talked about before, we have fossils. Okay, fossils are one way, you have different kinds of organisms, okay, that once lived, that no longer are around, right? Such as this, clearly it's a fish, a bony fish, yeah? This is probably a fossil fish that one doesn't exist anymore. So fossils will tell us that there were things that lived before, okay, that look similar to certain things that live now, living things that live now, but they don't exist anymore. Okay, so that means that there are things that lived before, don't live anymore, the species that they were, or the types they were, and then they're probably in the future, just like that sort of syllogism or like thought, right? That things that are living now might not exist maybe 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, 100,000, a million years from now, okay? So fossil evidence. We also have biogeography. What is biogeography? Geography has to do with where different land areas are. okay, or geography has to do with different kinds of land areas. And you have bio, which is life, right? So this has to do with the distribution of living things. So here we show, you know, what usually people show when they show the earth, the world. And here you have something called the Fertile Crescent. This is one of the birthplaces of what we call civilization, okay, in the world today, in our human world, the Fertile Crescent. Okay, so a lot of plants might have come from this area. So we have also the Yellow River Valley, the Yangtze River. Okay, you have all these different places. These are probably places where there's a lot of fossils, not just fossils, but art, okay, human artifacts that show that humans have actually lived there. Another aspect of biogeography, there was a fellow named Vavilov, okay? Nikolai Vavilov, very famous, very brave, very fierce, very brave fellow. He was a Russian, okay? He was one of the first people who first studied the biogeography, or where certain crop plants came from, okay? So soybean probably came out of China, okay? Apricot out of Central Asia, apple out of Central Asia as well, as you might recall from a previous lecture. We also have wheat and barley coming out of the Middle East, out of the Fertile Crescent area. Wheat, of course, the staff of life that makes bread, right? Rice from sugarcane at least, and rice from Southeast Asia. Anyway, so Vavilov, very important fellow. He died quite violently. His viewpoints were not thought to be correct for Stalinist Russia. So Stalin sent him into a gulag. He didn't die of starvation or overwork or malnutrition or the way a lot of people died in those places. He died because a guard was mistreating another prisoner, and he stopped, and he was not fighting with the guard, but telling the guard not to do that, so the guard shot him and he died. So he was a big, big giant of a fellow, I mean, in terms of personality and everything. He went all over Asia, all over the world, and to find origins of crop plants. He was really, really something, quite a hero. And this is like really somebody who would have typified what a botanist would have been like, So he was like afraid of nothing, So eventually he did die violently, but quite nobly, I would think, defending another person who needed help. Okay, that's like a very moral way to go. Okay, and also we have the evidence of molecular biology as well. Okay, so, and here we have Francis Crick's first sketch, okay, of the formation or of the conformation of DNA. Okay, so this is famous kind of, if you remember from the lecture that we talked about that. Okay, so we have the nucleotide sequences in DNA and even in RNA, because the way some people do taxonomy nowadays, they'll actually take RNA from the ribosome, they'll take our ribosomal RNA, right, and they'll actually sequence that. They'll actually figure out the sequences of nucleotides making up ribosomal RNA. And this is one way that people were able to actually divide different sorts of organisms from one group into another, depending on their ribosomal RNA sequence, okay? And people think that maybe the sequences of amino acids making up a protein, this is something that's going to be a wave of the future, using proteins instead of DNA or RNA, but looking at the products of the cell itself. Okay, so molecular biology also brings evidence, okay, for evolution, because, remember that I said that we are related to chimpanzees? Our DNA and chimpanzees' DNA is like 99% something exactly the same. All the people all over the world, if you were to take all men, all of the male sex, all of the male members of the human race, and you compared them to each other, they're really, the DNA is like 99.99999 really, really similar to each other, okay? So we humans, we're really, really related to each other. You might have recalled, there was something in the newspaper that I read a while ago, and it said that when you think about it, you had two parents, right? You had 4 grandparents, and it goes exponentially that way. Exponential growth, it goes up in this curve like that. So you had 8 great-grandparents, and you had 16 great-great-grandparents, and you had 32 great-great-great-grandparents. If you go back far enough, you are actually related. You have to be, just mathematically speaking, you have to be related to every other person on Earth, because all of us have like innumerable forebears that goes way back into the mists of time. Okay, so we are all related to each other, all people. Okay. And now we have other examples of evolution. Okay, we have what we call artificial selection in crop plants. Such as, this is something we saw before, members of this group, Brassica oleracea. And what you see here is wild mustard. Okay, all the different members of this group that we eat has been bred by humans. That's why they call it artificial selection. So this plant was made into things like cabbage. Remember, in broccoli, and cauliflower, kohlrabi, kale, yeah, Brussels sprouts. So I think we have some Brussels sprouts here. There are some cabbages here. Okay, now those are all these different kind of food plants are the result of the wonderful thing we humans have done, known as artificial selection. Okay, in plants. We also have kalo. Okay, here's some kalo corms, and also uala. This is the uala tuber, the root tuber. Okay, they are also the result of human selection. Okay, artificial selection in plants that people use for crops. Right? Wheat, of course. Rice, we talked about before also. Okay, and apples and oranges, which we also talked about before. Okay, apples and oranges, good stuff, very helpful for you. All right. Furthermore, even though this is a botany class, I like to bring in animal examples as well because they do also illustrate the concepts. And for us, since we're animals ourselves, we tend to be kind of animal-centric, you know, oftentimes, yeah? So we have breeds of dogs. Here's a Great Dane. And this looks like a little, some kind of a terrier of some kind, yeah. So these Great Danes are huge. They're like little horses or something. You know, they're very big dogs, very beautiful dogs too. They must eat a lot. Okay, here a couple of little, I think these are terriers. Yeah, Skye terriers or something, not sure. But these are purebreds. Okay, and here's a boxer. This one here is a boxer, which is a pretty big dog, and this is his or her little friend. Okay, which is probably a terrier of some kind. Yeah, so these are all members of the same species. Everybody would agree to that because they form an interbreeding population. So this, if these two dogs were different sexes, you could breed them together and they would have puppies. Except probably it would be better to breed the small dog being the male and the large dog being the female, because if you have a female small dog impregnated by a large male dog, well then the puppies might be intermediate in size. So the female dog, if she's smaller than the male, the puppies might be so big that they'd have to do a C-section on her, yeah, or she'd suffer a lot, or maybe even die if she went into labor. Okay. We also have pigeons. You know, I know that's not such a big thing in Hawaii so much, but in other areas, especially in England, pigeons, they breed pigeons, and even in this look here, you can see that they're real different looking. Okay, so people breed pigeons. I guess they race them for one thing, and they do use them for sending messages, like from England to France, and then from France to someplace else like that. I think people have a hobby of that. We also have different kinds of cattle. I think that this is actually a Holstein. I think it's a Holstein cattle. You know, those black and white cattle. Kind of. I think cows are very comforting. Yeah, they're very relaxed looking, and they seem very gentle. Here's a Texas Longhorn. Okay, these are all in the same species. I think it's called Bos taurus. Okay, so this is a Texas Longhorn. Looks like a bull. Yeah, it looks like a bull. And then here we have a Hereford. I think this is a Hereford cow. Yeah. We also have different kinds of pigs. There's a mama pig with her baby. Yeah. And two pigs nuzzling each other. So this is one thing that really is good about animals, to show animal examples, because you can see they're affectionate. You know, they actually touch, yeah, and we can understand that, you know, okay? So, all right. So here's another pig. Okay. Okay, so another kind of example of evolution is something your text talks about, which is natural selection. Natural selection didn't have to do with humans breeding or anything. It's something called bent grass, Agrostis tenuis, and this is a picture of that grass. It just looks like a grass, you know. What happened is that this Agrostis tenuis was growing near soil from lead mines. Lead, of course, is toxic. It's a heavy metal. It's a toxic metal. Okay, these lead mines in Wales. Okay, where it also had, so it had high concentration of this. This is lead, plumbum. Then you have Cu is copper, Zn is zinc, and Ni is nickel. High concentration. These are all heavy metals. Okay, all of them are toxic to people. Okay, so this is showing a copper mine. You can tell it's a copper mine because you see these kind of greenish colors. Because copper, of course, is sort of like a reddish yellowish sort of metal, but when it oxidizes, it turns green. Yeah, that's why if you have copper pipes in your house, sometimes you might have a little bit of a green tinge in your bathtub because the the oxidizing copper has stained it. Okay, and this is showing the people, these young. Look how young these boys are. Okay, and the grown-up miners. Mining has always been very dangerous, dirty work. Usually people don't do this kind of work unless they're not qualified or they just can't find any other kind of job. Okay, very sad. So the labor movement was partly due to the fact of bad bad labor conditions in the mines. It was not unusual for these men to die, and the boys too. And some of the boys would be as young as 8, even 6 years old. Okay, and they would employ these boys because they were small enough to fit in certain places that the larger men couldn't do. Okay, if it weren't for the labor movement, there'd probably still be children in the United States working in sweatshops and stuff, like they are in other places in the world. Okay, this is also the leavings of another mine. You can see that it's really dirty looking. There's not a whole lot of things, a lot of plants growing here. So it's toxic, you know. Here, warning, danger, stay out, stay alive. I second that motion. All right, so here, okay, so what happened is that they actually got some of this, you know, agrostis transplanted into uncontaminated soil. Some of the one that was growing in the contaminated soil, okay, and the ones that were growing in contaminated soil that was transplanted into uncontaminated soil were stunted. They were actually adapted for growing in lead and other heavy metal sort of soil. Okay. They also got some of this agrostis from uncontaminated soil growing naturally there and transplanted it into soil near the mines. Of those, 57 out of the 60 plants died, only 3 survived. Okay, so the three survivors just happened to have had the genes and the alleles that allowed them to grow in this mine soil. Okay, so one of the things you have to remember that the genetic change takes place first, and then the environment acts upon whatever the phenotype is, because you remember the genes, the genotype determines the phenotype or the different outward expression of the gene. Okay, so these 3 survivors just happened to have, randomly, just happened to have the adaptation to allow them to live on contaminated soil and thrive even. Okay, so so this is kind of an interesting. So this is a good example of evolution. Okay. So these 3 survivors just happened to have a toleration. They were able to live fairly well in the mine soil, and they already had that before they were transplanted. Okay. Other examples of evolution, okay, include antibiotic resistance and bacteria, and that's something that we have actually talked about before, right? Okay, so we can actually take a look at that. All right. Well, why don't we show you? So if you kind of take a look here on the Elmo, okay, you could actually have a petri dish, right, with these little bacterial colonies. Because usually when you're plating out bacteria, you might spot them on this way. What happens if you have one particular colony that I'll just darken here that happens to be resistant? It just happens to be that way. They just happen to mutate, okay, to change and have a mutation. And then what you do is you might pour antibiotic on here, which will kill the bacteria, except for that one colony might survive. And then before you know it, you'll have a petri dish only with antibiotic resistant bacteria. Okay, so this is actually what happens in our bodies as well. That's kind of the hue and cry, the big brouhaha about antibiotic resistance. Very bad. Okay. All right, now we also have another example in polyploid plants. Remember what polyploidy means? Remember ploidy? You have diploid individuals with 2 sets of chromosomes. You also have haploid parts that have only haploid number of chromosomes or half the number of chromosomes. Well, sometimes you have polyploid plants. We talked about this before. Okay, so what happens? So say, for example, you have a plant that has all of its cells having 3 sets of chromosomes. Okay, 2 sets of chromosomes. So you have the 2n number in this individual being 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess we have the homologous chromosomes all kind of lined up next to each other. What can happen is sometimes you can actually have gametes formed where you didn't have the chromosomes going to opposite. What can happen is that the spindle formation, the spindle might not form or something. Okay, so you could actually have gametes that are diploid, that actually have 2 sets of chromosomes. Then what can happen is that if they were bred together and brought together, what you have is something 4N. It's also known as a tetraploid. Okay, so if an individual has 3 sets of chromosomes, this has 2 sets, this has 2 sets, this has 2 sets, but this one has 4 sets, right, of chromosomes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this is a tetraploid. Okay, so that's something that can happen, all right? Another example is that this botanist, this fellow named De Vries, that he studied the evening primroses, also known as Winothera. Okay, Winothera, and that's how I think it's pronounced. Anyway, so what he'd done, he's actually bred them to themselves, and he came up with a tetraploid, okay, which he named as another species. Okay, another example is domesticated wheat. Okay, domesticated wheat, this is actually a result of artificial selection. What happened? Some human being, long time ago, thousands of years ago, crossed a goat grass with a kind of wheat called einkorn wheat. Okay, and they crossed together. This one is just showing that this one has 2 sets of chromosomes, this one has 2 sets of chromosomes. Okay, and they just, the letters don't really stand for anything in particular. And if they crossed these, they had offspring plant, okay, that doubled its chromosome numbers. Okay, so this one actually has 4 sets of chromosomes. Okay, this is and the result of that is what we call the Emmer wheats and the durum wheats. All right, I guess they're used to make pasta. Now, what they did then, they actually crossed this one here, okay, this tetraploid with another diploid goat grass, crossed them together, and what you ended up with. Hexaploid. Okay, you have 6 sets of chromosome in the kind of wheats that we use to make bread with. So this is this one clearly, you know, showing the fruiting head is not the same as any of its parents. It's different. Okay, and some of the kinds of differences that you'll see in tetraploids is that the plants tend to be bigger and have more substance. I mean, they're sturdier. They're not as floppy. Okay, and also they tend to have bigger flowers and bigger fruits. Okay, they're just very robust. Okay. Okay, so here's another picture of a goat grass. Yeah, so you can see it doesn't look very much like wheat at all, but it is closely enough related to it that you could hybridize with it. Okay. Another thing too, orchids, very well known. A lot of the orchids that, if you go to an orchid show, the ones that win a lot of prizes, oftentimes they're polyploids. Okay, and you can actually get a regular diploid or an orchid that has only 2 sets of chromosomes, and you can actually treat it with something called colchicine. Here's a chemical structure of something called colchicine, C-O-L-C-H-I-C-I-N-E. Now, colchicine is not really pleasant stuff to work with. Is actually a known carcinogen. What happens is that that makes sense, because what colchicine does is it disrupts the spindle. So when you have the chromosomes, you know, all arrayed and they're about to separate during meiosis 1, the spindle doesn't form. So what you end up with at the end, you end up with gametes with twice the chromosome number or the diploid number. So when they do actually breed together, you might end up with a polyploid of some kind. You can also, well, when you're using colchicine to treat a plant, you'll actually treat an area, a vegetated area of a plant, and that part will actually might have cells that will not separate, you know, in mitosis the right way. So you'll get actually a higher ploidy number. So you'll get, if you have a flower stalk blooming from that, you'll actually have flowers that have heavier substance. They're rounder, firmer. They're not floppy, you know, like some flowers are really big petals. The petals get to be floppy, right? So what happens is that you can get a bigger flower, have more substance, and just really firm, big, round, beautiful flowers. Okay. Anyway, so in summary, okay, what did we learn today? For one thing, we talked a little bit about the history of evolutionary thought. You know, the whole kind of chain of command, so to speak, or the whole history of how people really thought about where different kind of organisms might have come from. Okay. We also talked about Charles Darwin, a very great man, his life and also his life's work. And that probably was what he was put on earth to do, to actually do the work that he did. Okay? We talked about the premises of natural selection. We talked about the mechanisms of evolution. We talked about the evidence for evolution. And we talked about examples of evolution as well. Okay, so that's what we have for you today. I know that was kind of a lot, just like, a lot of these lectures, we have a lot of things jam-packed into it. Okay, so what you can do is, as always, if you have any questions, you can email me and I'll get back to you as soon as possible, or come see me in my office hours. So that's all we have for you today. Okay, and looking forward to seeing you again, and bye-bye.